Welcome, friends, to this presentation on LGBTQ and faith in Uganda with this illustrious team of Bishop Joseph Tolton, Adrian Van Clinken, Ph.D., Diane Sydney Bakuraira, Twogyeirwe, and Pastor Simon Anthony Mpinga. I am Mark Bowman, Executive Director of the LGBTQ Religious Archives Network, the host of today's program. LGBTQ RAN is a unique venture dedicated to preserving the history of LGBTQ religious movements around the world. LGBTQ RAN is a digital enterprise. We are not a physical repository that stores papers. We advise and support leaders and groups in their efforts to preserve their records in appropriate archives. Secondly, we collect and provide a treasure of historical information on our website about LGBTQ plus persons and groups from a wide array of religious expressions around the world. And finally, we encourage research and scholarship in LGBTQ religious history. We are pleased today to have the chance to host an intriguing discussion on religious activism in Uganda in recent decades. First, you will hear an overview of the historical context of Christianity in Africa in the 20th century and the influence of evangelical Christians from around the US coming to Uganda. Then, you will hear from three Ugandan religious activists, Diane, Tom, and Pastor Simon, about their struggles and accomplishments over the past 20 years and look ahead to the future. Adrian Van Clinken is professor and chair of religion and African studies at the University of Leeds in the UK, where he also serves as director of the Center for Religion and Public Life. Adrian is also extraordinary professor in the Desmond Tutu Center for Religion and Social Justice at the University of the Western Cape in South Africa. Adrian's research focuses on Christianity, gender, and sexuality in contemporary African contexts. His most recent books are Reimagining Christianity and Sexual Diversity in Africa, co-authored with Ezra Chitando, and Sacred Queer Stories, Ugandan LGBTQ plus refugee lives in the Bible, along with Johanna Steibert, Sibyala Bryan, and Frederick Hudson. Bishop Joseph Tolton is the founder and president of Interconnected Justice, established in 2019 as a global racial justice movement in which the continent of Africa and its diaspora build an ecosystem of self-defined and determined advocacy. As an LGBT global faith leader, Bishop Tolton also serves as the Bishop of Global Ministries for the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries, designing and managing TFAM's justice ministries and collaborations outside of the United States, with a focus on East Africa. Bishop Tolton works directly with leaders to build integrated justice movements, connecting activists with civil society advocates, media professionals, academics, and political leaders. To those of you watching this webinar, we welcome your comments or questions in the chat box. The presenters will respond to those during a Q&A time toward the end of today's program. And if you would like to offer personal greetings or comments to any of the presenters, stick around after the webinar is completed and you will be invited into the Zoom room with them. Finally, please direct any technical concerns to Wasati, who is the tech manager for this program. Now, I am pleased to welcome Adrian Van Clinken and Bishop Joseph Tolton to begin this discussion on LGBTQ and faith in Uganda beyond the single story.
Thank you so much, Mark, for this very kind introduction, and indeed for hosting this important event today. It is so wonderful to be part of this conversation and to find myself in the company of so many wonderful friends and comrades who do such groundbreaking work in Uganda. Can I just check, is my slide coming up?
Yes.
Wonderful. So the title of today's discussion is LGBTQ and faith in Uganda, Beyond the Single Story. And I think that the subtitle is really important here, because we are all too familiar with the dominant story that exists about LGBTQ people and in Uganda. It is the story of the controversial anti-homosexuality bill that passed through the Ugandan parliament in 2013, with strong support from the religious sector. It is the story of the infamous Pastor Martin Sempa screening gay porn in his church to show the congregation the disgusting acts that homosexuals do in the privacy of their bedroom. It is the story of Uganda as a so-called born-again nation, based on evangelical Christian principles, meaning that, in the words of the former Minister of Ethics and Integrity, gay people can forget about human rights. Yet, this story is not the only one. There is another story to be told about LGBTQ communities claiming dignity, fighting for their rights, about courageous faith leaders such as Bishop Christopher Sonjanjo, supporting their quests, even if it comes at great personal expense, about bold and daring pastor activists setting up LGBTQ affirming spaces and campaigning for change in the religious sector and in society at large. This is the story that many people don't know about, and our conversation today hopefully helps to change that. I've been asked to briefly provide some historical context to Christianity in Uganda and Africa more broadly, in order to understand contemporary dynamics. And the key point is that the history of Christianity in the region is one of contestation and appropriation. Contestation, because the arrival of Christianity in the 19th century was closely connected to the history of European imperialism and colonialism. So from the very early beginning, Christianity was involved in a quest for power, caused political conflicts, divided communities, and raised questions about the relationship between ethnic and cultural identity on the one hand, and this new foreign faith on the other. This contestation and its deadly consequences, it is illustrated by what has become the foundational story of Ugandan Christianity, the story of the Ugandan martyrs, 40 Christian converts who were killed by the Buganda king, Kabaka Mwanga. Reportedly, these converts, many of whom were young men living in the royal court, were killed not just because they had converted to Christianity, but because after their conversion, they refused to give in to the king's sexual demands. So this means that the struggle over homosexuality is part of the foundational story of Ugandan Christianity. But it also means that popular claims today that homosexuality is un-African and un-Ugandan are unsustainable. Other conflicts emerged too in the early church in Uganda, such as about polygamy and about the status of women. So this is to say that the issues of power, of gender and sexuality from the very beginning have been part of the story of Christianity in the region. Yet in addition to contestation, the history of Christianity is also one of appropriation. Because as much as the new faith was introduced by European missionaries and was part of a struggle over political, economic and cultural power, it was also embraced by local communities. Undoubtedly, they did so partly for pragmatic reasons. For example, to find a job with the colonial government or to send their kids to mission schools. But partly they embraced Christianity also because it was an appealing religious option to them in the midst of a changing world. In the process of conversion, they had to negotiate a new identity, which not only changed them, but also Christianity itself. Gradually, from a white man's religion, it became the religion practiced in local communities, in particular by women and youth, and expressed in ways that the missionaries could not have imagined. So the appropriation of Christianity in Uganda and in the wider East African region was a creative process, a dynamic process with considerable African agency. It resulted, for instance, in indigenous churches, often led by women prophets, that existed outside of the control of European missionaries. It also gave rise to a major revival that transformed the face of the mission-founded churches, the Balocali Movement, or the East African Revival. In the 20th century, the two major denominations in Uganda, the Catholic Church and the Anglican Church, both Africanized their leadership and enculturated their worship style. And in recent decades, evangelical and Pentecostal movements have emerged with new religious energy and creativity, appealing to the youth. So to conclude, contestation and appropriation are the two axes along which Christianity in Uganda has developed into the dynamic and diverse Christian landscape of the country today. The controversies over homosexuality are part of this longer history, but so is the emergence of the LGBTQ Christian faith groups in the country. They write a new chapter in this ongoing history of contestation and appropriation. Thank you.
Greetings, greetings, greetings. All I can say is to my dear brother, Adrian Van Clinken, I always learn something new when I have the opportunity to hear you present. It is an absolute pleasure for me to be here today. I want to thank the LGBTQ Religious Archives and Mark Bowman for the work that he has done for many years. And thank you for your creativity and foresight in putting together this timely conversation. Again, what a delight it is for us to be here on today. And I do believe that each one of you will be edified by what you will hear today. And again, Adrian, thank you so very, very kindly. You really are a great asset to our community. And it is a blessing to be working with you. Again, to the best of my ability, I would like to build on Adrian's comments as he has so beautifully created a portrait of the picture of the history of Christianity on the continent of Africa, particularly as it relates to matters of human sexuality in a very contemporary context. My task today is to try to connect the dots between what we know to be the experience of LGBTI people on the continent as it relates to faith and the global Christian economy. Before he was an activist, Dr. Martin Luther King was a Christian who believed that the beloved community was the peaceable reign of Christ on the earth. The outright, obvious, and raw racism of both America's separate but equal policy and the colonialism in Africa was challenged and rebuked by a counter message of justice as the force of redemption facilitated by Calvary. Racism as a core element of the American Christian faith was disorganized by the civil rights movement, which was strategically in sync with the African freedom liberation movements of the 1960s. One of the headlines in the news in America today, obviously outside of the horrific war in Ukraine, is that Judge Ketanji Jackson is meeting with members of the United States Senate as she is preparing for her judicial nomination hearings, as she is the first African-American woman to be appointed as a judicial candidate for the highest court in America. This is such an important news story because of the ways in which the American conservatives have manipulated the courts over the last 10 years. You all may remember when the world was gripped by the salacious story of the then Judge Kavanaugh, who was appointed as a US Supreme Court nominee. Beyond the unfortunate drama of the allegations of sexual misconduct against the judge, his nomination was a game changer for the American social and economic tapestry because it now meant that conservatives dominated the US Supreme Court with then a 5-4 vote, which is now 6-3. Why is this so very important? In 1973, the US Supreme Court's decision to empower women with the right to make choices about their bodies. This is the Roe v. Wade decision, which made abortion legal. That decision breathed new life into the religious right in the aftermath of the ways in which the civil rights movement and Dr. King had disorganized the movement. It is important to know that leading up to that Roe v. Wade decision, America's relationship with the rest of the world was rapidly changing. July 20th, 1969, America placed a man on the moon, which said that now we were exploring new frontiers with unlimited possibilities, and there would be global competition to dominate spatial exploration. In 1972, the then President Nixon went to China. What an important moment. It signaled the opening of international markets and the dawn of the age of globalization. African nations were liberated between the 1960s and the 70s, while African Americans were being liberated. And then in 1973, the Roe v. Wade decision happened. The empowerment of women in the Roe v. Wade decision was a watershed moment, not only for America's culture war, but it signaled a momentous shift in the future of Christianity. While the world was pivoting toward globalization, this court decision marked a turning point as America was now on its way from being a nation confined by Judeo-Christian social ideas to being a secular nation. The reach, impact, gripped, and the determinative power of religion in American politics and economics would now be on the decline. American white Christian fundamentalists understood well where America was going. And in fact, they were right. America now is a country where 50% of the people almost identify as not being totally affiliated with any particular religion. These behavioral shifts and the decline in the supremacy of white Christianity in America are happening all at the same time that there is a shocking growth in a commitment to Christianity in Africa. The religious right saw this coming in the 1970s, and since then has been in bed with African dictators and autocrats, opening up corporate America's economic pipeline to invest in these countries where autocrats and dictators make deals and are able to siphon off much of the profit coming into their country so that they can maintain control of the economic trajectory of the nation and fill their coffers at the same time. This unfortunate cycle is so critical to the ways in which autocrats on the continent, in relationship with American conservative evangelicals, have used Africans in terms of their economic plight and their political plight to create a sense of moral panic, knowing that many Africans feel as if they are not economically empowered or culturally empowered. So their only power is to hold on to their culture. And the American religious right has manipulated this idea for many, many, many years. And we saw this blossom, and we saw this coming to full view when the American religious right, in partnership with the ecclesiastical elites in Uganda and the political elites, made a decision that they were going to adopt Uganda as the laboratory in which this entire economic and political and spiritual mechanism that they have going on would be given a laboratory where they could incubate the idea. And they tested that idea in 2009 with the introduction of the anti-gay bill. It was their first step in trying to create a nation in which the law of God was now the law of the land. I first visited Uganda in 2010 as an ambassador of goodwill to stand in solidarity with the Uganda's LGBTI community. And we have seen the incredible work that the LGBTI faith community has done in Uganda, pushing back, not just against their local adversaries, but against a global machine of Christianity that is purposed to create a particular picture of the world. What has happened in Uganda is completely connected to what's happening in America, because now Texas has become America's Uganda. The odious component of the Uganda anti-gay bill was that not only was homosexuality punishable by death, but it demanded that neighbors turn on each other and go to the local authorities and turn in people they suspected of being LGBTI. Fast forward from 2009 to 2021, in Texas, a law was created to practically ban abortion. And what was one of the components of that law? That anybody, including an Uber driver who drives you to an abortion clinic, anybody who assists you in getting to that abortion or participates in helping to facilitate you getting an abortion, they themselves could also receive some kind of a legal penalty, putting themselves in legal jeopardy. This is the great connection between the American conservative religious establishment and the Ugandan conservative religious establishment. It is a global web that exalts white supremacy and heteronormativity, and certainly lifts up the ideals of patriarchy. It is so important that we realize how interconnected the world is that we live in. But just like the civil rights movement disorganized the religious right in our country in the 60s, it is the work of these young people, these great activists that I am about to introduce to you, because their work is disorganizing the global economy of Christianity, which seeks to create a very particular picture of the world. I am thrilled and excited, and I feel really blessed to present to you those who are on the ground doing this amazing work. Diane Sydney Bakuraira is a co-founder of Women of Faith in Action that advocates for the inclusion of women in leadership positions in the church in Uganda. Pastor Simon Anthony Mpinga is a preacher, human rights activist and defender, author, musician, motivational speaker, worship leader, and an organizer. He is the senior pastor of TFAM Uganda, and he is the founding pastor of another ministry in Mukono. Tom Twogyeirwe is the national coordinator of the United Coalition of Affirming Africans Uganda, a coalition of religious leaders that advocates for inclusion and respect of human rights of LGBT plus persons in Uganda. I want to welcome our panelists, and I'm hoping that they will use my remarks as a springboard, now having created the interconnectedness between the global conservative Christian movement that is moving not only in Uganda, but across the world to create this very, very limited scope and picture and view of human rights and who's included, who is valued, who is honored with their full dignity and human worth. Now that that picture has been created, these are the activists living on the ground in Uganda, doing the great work of building the movement that is disorganizing, once again, the global economy of conservative Christianity. And I'm so proud to consider them not only my friends, but my colleagues. I welcome each of you. I will start with Diana. We'll go to Pastor Simon, and then we will go to dear brother Tom, Minister Tom, and they will introduce themselves, talk a little bit about their work, and we'll facilitate some conversation. Thank you so kindly.
Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, people online. Thank you, Bishop Tolton. My name is Diane Sydney Bakuraira, and I work at Sexual Minorities Uganda, which is a network of LGBTI organizations in Uganda. And I also co-found Women of Faith in Action, which is basically to bring back women who have since abandoned their religion and spirituality due to the biases. Again, my work around faith is to reconcile my LGBT community back to, the love and goodness of Christ, based on the ongoing work that has been done by the anti-gay groups to detach us from our spirituality. So my work is around reconciling and also having mainstream religious leaders understand LGBTI folk. Thank you.
Blessings to you and thank you. Pastor Simon.
Greetings, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here today. Everybody that is watching online, and Bishop Tolton, thank you for the wonderful introduction. My name is Simon Anthony Mpinga, and I am the senior pastor of TFAM Uganda, which is an LGBTIQ grounded church. And our work is centered around creating a safe space and also fighting to see that the LGBTIQ community recovers what has been lost due to the claims of the conservative faith organizations with the churches that they are working with down here, and creating hatred and chasing the LGBTIQ people out of ministry and out of churches and out of Christianity. So our work as TFAM Uganda started underground, under cells, together with Sexual Minorities Uganda. But right now, we managed to safely create a space where the LGBTIQ community can gather for worship. And I'm so excited, and the work, the human rights work that we are doing, and also to prove to everybody else that we can still work even with the women, with the children, and everybody else. And I want to bless the name of the Lord that I'm here today. That is briefly what we do. God bless you.
Amen. Thank you. Dear Minister Tom.
Hello, thank you so much for this great opportunity to have this conversation with you all. My name is Tom Twogyeirwe. I am the National Coordinator at Universal Coalition of Affirming Africans Uganda. UCAA have been in existence for 4 years, and our work is focused on influencing mindset change amongst religious leaders and people of faith, especially in the already existing places of worship, including Roman Catholic Church, Anglican Church, Orthodox Church, Islam, and free churches, with primary goal of confronting religious-based discrimination to foster an inclusive society that applies biblical principles of love. Uganda is a religiously diverse nation, with Christianity being the most widely professed religion. According to the most recent national census 8 years ago, over 84% of the population is Christian, while 14% of the population adhere to Islam. And since civil and political homophobic messages is mainly fueled by religion, this implies that the anti-LGBT+ teachings reaches and influences a large number of population in Uganda. We experience some challenges, and some major challenges include conservatism of majority of religious leaders who got lost in strongholds of culture and simply want to think within the box rather than thinking outside the box. And this, combined with the limited access to theological training before they actually start ministry, has dragged the widespread of new information, new knowledge, and new understanding on the interpretation of the biblical scriptures that speak about same-sex relationships. At UCAA, we are implementing a 5-year strategic plan, which is primarily focusing on evidence-based advocacy. As such, we make research to dig deeper into the original translation of the Bible, like the 1534 German Luther translation that used the word Kinaben in Leviticus. And in modern translations, it was left plain as a man who sleeps with another man is condemned. But according to German Luther translation of 1534, the word Kinaben actually means boys, while skanda means molesters. And that actually discredits the same-sex messages derived from Leviticus. Later, we used the findings to create awareness among religious leaders, people of faith, opinion leaders. For instance, we are of recent writing a book, Understanding the Bible and LGBT plus persons, that responds to the most common questions. We are yet to publish that. To be fair, the collaborative efforts with other charities, including SMAG, TFAM, and others, have made the LGBT plus movement at least move a step ahead in regards to inclusivity. We are all using different approaches and different strategies, but all that everyone does adds a string to the bow of creating an inclusive society and promotion of human rights, not only for LGBT plus persons, but human rights for all. We have achieved something over the last 10 years, and a few of the things that we have really achieved includes inclusive churches led by inspired LGBT plus people of faith and heterosexual but inclusive religious leaders. That's really fascinating, because we have seen churches emerging to form inclusive, but also local churches. We have seen religious leaders moving from a step or from a point of being homophobic and now being inclusive. Speaking of which, UCAA at this moment have 31 religious leaders from all denominations who are fully inclusive and welcome LGBT plus persons in their churches and are actually working tirelessly to change the narrative in our societies. Another thing is, I have seen open doors for dialogue and conversations. Unlike 10 years ago or 20 years ago, people these days are much more willing to sit down and actually listen, even if they disagree. But it is a very important milestone, because it all begins from the point of sitting down and listening and then doubting a little bit, and then in the near future the person comes to discover the truth. And the truth in this case is all people are the same in the eyes of God, but also human rights for all should be observed regardless of our sexual identities and sexual orientations. And there is definitely hope for the future. To be fair, I am hopeful that the commitment and the tireless efforts in advocacy from a combination of civil, religious, and community-based will take us to the next level. Thank you so much for listening. I really look forward.
Thank you so much, Minister Tom. I'd like to go back to the theme for a moment, because the theme speaks to this idea that life in Uganda in terms of LGBTQ matters and faith, that it's beyond the single story. And I think that we can speak to this idea of moving beyond this single story in a number of ways. And so, Didi, I'd like to start with you, because one of the arguments from an African perspective has been that homosexuality is imported from the West. And because of that, I think that it is that argument has tried to box in Africans and create this idea that they have to work in an isolated way and kind of prove the Africanness of their LGBTQ dignity struggle. Now, that was a strategy that was intentional to try to, as I said, isolate you all, because isolation will make you weaker. Now that we clearly see that in America, the conservative Christian right is trying to turn the state of Texas into our Uganda, and we know that this is not a Ugandan issue, but a global issue, do you think that this will change or influence your strategies on the ground, and that perhaps African activists will begin to fight this fight from more of a position of being globalist, which is a different shift, but perhaps an important one, because now it's out in the open. It wasn't maybe 10 years ago, but it's out in the open now that the forces against us are global. Why should we be fighting a local fight? First, Diana, your response to that kind of long statement with a question somewhere in it.
I think the issue around the issue happening in Texas is a global issue, but then also I feel it will not change because one, where we came from with where we are now and the strides we've made using our different strategies, it's definitely it's not going to affect us, one, but it will have an impact, though we have the kind of strategy we're using right now is one, empowering ourselves with information based on the different narratives that have been put before us, but also bring in our culture and tradition, again, that has been used to bash us. So we are well equipped. So meaning that even if they come with their strategy, we are prepared with this information, but also with the different strategies to, counteract whatever they come with, to disrupt our different strategies that we're employing.
Thank you so much. Pastor Simon, your thoughts, your reflection. I think you're on mute. If you can unmute yourself.
Dear Bishop, when you were speaking, you were cracking here. I don't know what whether it was a network problem or something. So I did not get right what you were trying to ask.
My apologies. Very briefly, the question that I'm asking is, or there's a statement associated with it. LGBT activists in Africa have been accused of the idea of homosexuality being imported from the West, which I think was a strategy set up to isolate you all as a movement. Now we know that this is really a global enterprise, because in America, we're creating our own Uganda in the state of Texas. Do you think the fact that now it is clear that conservatives around the world, Africans or Americans, whoever, are now working together, that LGBTI activists in Africa, but particularly in Uganda, will kind of step up and now say, well, we are going to work with progressives from around the world because our opponents are playing a global game and boxing us in to play a national game. What is your thought and reflection on that comment?
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Bishop. First of all, it took us a lot of time to realize and discover that the feud here and the hatred here was a result of conservatives that were bringing ideas and pouring a lot of money in Uganda to affect certain mainstream churches in order to create an image that the LGBTQ religious activists were trying to buy something that was foreign. We are trying to, being an activist of the LGBTIQ persons is something that has been imported. And we have come to learn completely that this is, not true. And as pastors, affirming pastors and religious leaders, it is one of the things we are trying to unteach the people after being taught, because homosexuality has been here from long time ago. And people's sexual identities have been, it has not been maybe put out there in the public, or it has not been in the media, but it is something that has been here very many years ago. But what is happening in Texas is an eye-opener also to the Ugandan activists and African activists, that there has been a link of the hatred that is taking place in Uganda with what has with the Western world. The Western world has really been influencing the conservatives when they came here. The influence of the hatred of people like Pastor Male, Pastor Sempa in Uganda here has fuel behind it that has been created by conservatives from the United States. And they have put in cash. Some are even speaking without even having an idea of what they are speaking about, but they are just being given a lot of money to fight, and also to confuse, and also to create their ground, like you said earlier, to make Uganda a dumping ground of their I call them evil ideas of segregation against people because of their sexuality. So I really, really think this is an eye-opener to every activist, even my brothers and sisters on the panel and those that are watching us. It is an eye-opener that this has its roots from the very Western world, that, when we see what is happening in Texas, it is self-explanatory that after the resistance that we have done back in Uganda, now they are creating sort of a Uganda in Texas, and which we know that with the global union, with the Pan-Africanism, it will also not stand.
Absolutely. We're going to ask for your questions in the chat. Pastor Simon, I want to follow up with you because there's a connection that that seeks to be made between the LGBT community in Uganda and the Bobi Wine movement. And what I also want to lift up is that this idea of religious conservatives becoming autocratic and not interested in democracy because they want to manipulate the ballot box, it's happened. It's clearly a method in Uganda, but it's also now a method in America. But now we see that there are many in the religious conservative movement in America who are connected to Putin, because the idea of American conservative theology is now being very connected to the idea of autocracy. All of this is about creating a society where people who are marginalized are continued to be oppressed. Are you all starting to really feel the vibe of this connection? And then Tom is going to give us his reflections. But I know you have a particular understanding. I wanted to just speak to that issue as well. Pastor Simon, go ahead.
Yeah, well, in the past campaigns, whenever people want to keep themselves in power in Africa, they will look for allies greedy like them. They will look for allies that are going to take in their ideas. So it is happening so much that whoever is a dictator or wants to sustain themselves for a long time in power, they will work with the conservatives. It has been very alarming during the past campaigns in Uganda that many people were imprisoned, not because of anything. It was hiding under the fact that the culture in Uganda will not support homosexuality, so they would end up arresting people. But it was clearly stated by the president that the Bobi Wine movement, which is the National Unity Platform, was being funded by the LGBTIQ communities in the Western world. And I know very well that this was a diversion. This is a diversion. It is not the first time we're seeing things like this. It is a diversion where if they see a lot of pressure, if the government sees a lot of pressure from the opposition, they will try to divert the minds of the citizens with some cultural, changes, some cultural heat of the moment, and they have used homosexuality a lot. They have used the LGBTIQ persons as a target area to, to divert the populations. So this has been a claim, and it has been, placed onto the Bobi Wine movement. They are being supported by homosexuals, but I know very well that these are strategies that are laid right from the conservatives to try to self-sustain them in power, so that they have allies. Even when it comes, the Putin thing is from another world also. So there is a way they have created allies, but they have centered it. When it comes to Africa, they have to center it from grounds of culture, because heteronormativity in Uganda and in Africa at large has been conflated.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Pastor. Minister Tom, what are your thoughts? Now that it's out that the American conservatives, the Ugandan conservatives, their allies, they're working together, how do you think that should impact the wonderful work that you all do, trying to move forward with another narrative about Christian liberation, and particularly the interpretation of the text? What are your thoughts?
All right, firstly, I really apologize for the interruptions in my previous presentations. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
Okay, that's really nice. So working together is the way to go if we are to achieve, that is the thing. But also, I would like to focus the talk on Uganda rather than America and Uganda. So speaking specifically about Uganda, I think folks are already really doing strategies in the United States of America. Might be different strategies that might be applied to actually achieve here. So while some other strategies can actually work hand in hand from Uganda and then in the United States and achieve the same goal, I think sometimes we just need to focus on a specific issue in a specific area, because sometimes issues and different ways of approaching issues are really different. So speaking in regards about Uganda, I think folks are already doing a lot of amazing job. The farm is doing amazing job. SMAG is doing amazing job. UCAA is working on different issues, though we are all using different approaches and strategies, but we are all looking forward to the same goal. So if we have brothers and sisters in the United States, not only the United States, but across the globe, praying for us, supporting us, and just like keep like the working together, like keeping our hands held together. I think that's the way to go.
Thank you so much, Minister.
Otherwise, I think.
All right, his sound has gone out again. I want to thank you so much, Minister Tom, for your comments. And I think that the thread or the arc that we're creating here this afternoon is that we understand the global connections, we understand the global pipeline, but we're also very sensitive to implementation of our strategies and creating unique and customized strategies from a national perspective. And I very much so appreciate that both and thinking. I would like to encourage our audience. We're so grateful that you're here with us today. Please place your questions into the chat. I'm sure that you have follow-up questions, you have reflections that you would like for one of our panelists to respond to. So please, we encourage you to go ahead and use the chat and talk to us, because we want to be able to talk back to you. Diana, I want to come to you and talk a little specifically about what I think is one of the most underutilized potential forces of power that we have as progressives, and that is making a clear connection between LGBTI dignity and women's rights. And I know that you work very much so in that lane. Do you think that we need to do a better job of connecting these issues of human sexuality and gender justice? What are your thoughts in that regard?
Thank you, Bishop. Definitely, we need to put a lot of effort because, again, as you yourself mentioned, and myself and people watching us know that there's a lot of patriarchy with our systems. So again, the work that we do is to encourage. I work with the Wawa Abba Institute, which is under the Fellowship of Affirming Ministers, which is basically providing leadership skills to LBQ women and LBQ women to sort of, engage in these positions and understand the energy, understand the dynamics around, gender and sexuality, but also how we can take up these spaces, to amplify the LBQ voices in these spaces, because we have seen every time there's opportunity or safe spaces, our voices are gagged. So the work that I do and other activists in the LBQ community is to sort of amplify that. So again, on the voice around amplifying resources and opportunities, I definitely encourage anyone out there to support the work that is already being done to amplify and also include and have these radical conversations around gender balance, gender equality in the faith work, but also generally in the LGBT community.
Thank you so much for that insight, Didi. We have a question from the chat. How can American human rights activists help queer inclusion and decriminalization in Uganda? Is there one of you who would like to take that question? How can American human rights activists help queer inclusion and decriminalization in Uganda? Pastor Simon.
Well, I believe that, thank you so much, Bishop, the human rights activists in the United States could be very helpful and useful if they started with radically fighting the conservatives back at home, because what affects people in the United States affects us directly. What happens in most cases in the US affects us directly. So that could be number one. And number two, also reaching out to activists back in Uganda that are out and open and ready to, take on the progressive work of making sure that human rights are not abused. The LGBTI rights are not abused. So I believe the connection, the exchange programs, like when I was coming in to begin the active human rights work, there was an exchange program that was created by the American Embassy, where pastors, affirming pastors from the United States and activists were brought here, and then affirming pastors and human rights activists were taken to the United States from Uganda. And there was that kind of exchange program. It was very, very helpful. I believe those are some of the strategies that can be really used if we work together as affirming pastors, affirming ministers, and human rights activists and LGBTIQ rights activists. We need to look out for each other because we are looking up to United States. If they fight to be who they are, then we can also fight to become what we want to become.
Bless you, and thank you for that. Another question from the chat. How do you think the strategies we've discussed today can be replicated in West Africa, where colonial and indigenous patriarchy seem more entrenched than in Southern and East Africa? This is a really interesting and kind of big question. I'm not a particular expert on what's going on in West Africa, but it is true that there has been a particular investment made in East Africa, and the movement seems a little bit stronger. Obviously, that has a lot to do with funding. It also has a lot to do with the fact that East Africa has been so targeted, and in particular Uganda. And so therefore there was a response to the Ugandan situation that spilled over the borders into a response or support or a connection with the movements in Kenya and in Rwanda, and to some degree in the eastern part of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. But I think that this is an important question. We also know that there's been an investment, and obviously the presence of South Africa in the southern region of Africa has had a particular influence as well. What are your thoughts about West Africa? Anyone in particular have any thoughts there? I know, Didi, do I see you wanting to respond? I certainly know that OHAI has been working with an organization to try to replicate a funding organization in West Africa. Obviously, there's a particular situation in Ghana right now. We all know, of course, the recent history of the anti-gay legislation in Nigeria. Any thoughts about West Africa?
I think the same way when Uganda was going through the anti-homosexuality bill and the conversations and debates, we also remember Kenya borrowed the same, Rwanda borrowed the same. So I think, again, it's still in the African context. So the strategies still apply, though, again, it has to be strategic in terms of how they deal, or which person they have contact with, and how, you know, they can move around to collect solidarity, one, but also who exactly are they approaching to have, you know, sort of these conversations. Because back here we didn't have that much we didn't have much contact, but again, the solidarity and the strategies that we used, I think, can be used the same in the West. Same way Kenya did employ some of the strategies that we used in Uganda, and also picked some, Uganda picked some from Kenya. So I think it's the same. They can also pick, you know, some that can work in their context.
Excellent, thank you. Anyone else want to speak to that question?
What I would love to say, Bishop, is that the momentum of the heat will determine how much water you have to pour in order to put it out, the momentum of the fire. I really think the reason why the movement in East Africa is strong is because there were targets from the Western world. And after the resistance, now we can see the shift to West Africa. And it is very fortunate that as it is happening in West Africa, there are brothers and sisters and others in East Africa that have been through the same. I believe that the best way, like Diane said, the best way is to look at what is happening here and see the strategies that are being used, especially working together. The East African LGBTIQ community has become one, almost one, you know, even with organizations that are coming up like Forward Together. I mean, these have all been put in place because there was a common goal, there was a common enemy, there was common pain. So I believe that even West Africa needs to borrow a leaf so that they create something solid within the West African countries, and it becomes a solid community as the West African LGBTIQ community.
Awesome, thank you. Brother Tom, do you want to add to that before I go to the next question in the chat?
No, thank you. It's been exhausted.
Okay, great. I want to read this, and be patient with me. Because I want to give it the full context. This person who has sent a message says that they're involved with LGBT issues in Uganda. They have a friend who is an attorney who could not be on the call, but based on their work and their understanding of the work of a friend who is a gay attorney near Jinja, this is what they're lifting up. What is most critically needed right now on the ground is legal and medical support for those who are outed, and support for creating safe houses and an underground railroad for those who need to leave Uganda because they have been outed. Can you all address this idea of the role of safe houses in Uganda and the need for greater support in that regard. Which one of you would like to take on that important question? Is there a need for more support of safe houses in order to really get the job done?
Yes, definitely. My sister Diane knows, one of the struggles that we go through is the fact that now they have started spotting where a safe house for the LGBTIQ people is. Now that is the target. Thus calling for more, resources. So because even the safe places or the safe houses that are being created are created with little capacity. So sometimes the security, we like the beginning of this year, we have had several attacks against the safe houses that have been put in place, but because of security, majorly. It is because of security that what you have, the resources that we have, will only enable us to get a certain safe house that we can. And sometimes the neighborhood is terrible, and sometimes where the location is bad, and people can infiltrate it. The enemy can easily infiltrate it and get to where it is. So I believe that there needs to be more resources poured in so that there are reliable safe houses, not only safe houses, but reliable safe houses with beefed up security. And also the legal system. Well, we might not speak so much about the legal system. There are organizations here that are already doing a recommendable job, but the safe houses and medical for people that have been outed. Yes, it is very important. These resources we need. There is need for more resources. There is need for more, sometimes it is even capacity building on how to beef up security and how to create safe spaces in form of homes and houses, safe houses for the LGBTIQ community, because now they have become the target. After knowing the solution to the problem of people that have been outed, now the target is on the houses, the safe houses, the shelters.
Absolutely. The cycle, I'm sorry, please finish your thought. Okay, the psychological pressure that you all are under is just remarkably intense. And I don't want to leave out the need for some conversation about what is the infrastructure that you all have in place to be able to deal with the heavy assault on the psyche from such a vitriolic environment of where homophobia is so dominant. Can one of you, maybe Didi, speak to that? What infrastructure do you all have in place to support each other in terms of the mental health challenges that naturally result from the constant assault that you all live under?
Can I also just, before I answer, I wanted to answer two in one, because I see a question around how we work in our context with safe spaces in order for people to meet and grow in faith. So it's the same thing. And I keep using the hopefulness, and the grace of God, because again, with this type of work, if you do not have that hope and faith, that you're representing a community, you're protecting a community, you're defending a community, you'll break. So it's usually around the hopefulness and faith, but also the support system that the LGBT community has within itself. Because much as each of us have our diverse backgrounds, somehow there's always a connection between one individual, either in the LGBTQ community or many individuals in the LGBTQ community, or in the gay community, or in the bisexual community, or intersex, or the trans, or the queer. So it is a connection, and the love for, first of all, the togetherness and the grace of God is all I can say, because sometimes it gets heavy and you can only rely on the grace of God and the hopefulness. And again, there's also a question around, what keeps us doing this difficult work. It's again, the passion to see change, but also the conviction that you do not want the future generation to go through what you've gone through. So you put all the efforts and everything to make sure that, the structures.
Okay, Didi has frozen, but I thank her for her answer, and she also kind of gave some concluding remarks in her answer thus far. Dear Brother Tom, what keeps you hopeful about doing this work? And could you please give us your concluding remarks, and then I'll come to you for your concluding remarks, Pastor Simon. But please, 2 minutes, Minister Tom, and then 2 minutes, Pastor Simon. Minister Tom.
Okay, great. One thing that keeps me moving is, first of all, seeing some change happening, and also seeing a smile on somebody's face being put on their faces because of the kind of work that we are doing. Honestly, that satisfies me. I feel like that is very fulfilling, and that keeps me going day by day, night by night, and every time, just to make sure that people are actually reaching at a peaceful situation between their sexual orientation and Christianity. That's very important. It's a hard journey, but then it's a walk that deserves to be walked. And it's a walk that we all need to walk with each other to actually reach our destination. I thank you so much for being here today. It's really been a great opportunity, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That answer was so warm and comforting, so human and so compassionate, because at the end of the day, after talking about the politics and the economics, we are really talking about the impact that this has on individual human souls. Pastor Simon, what keeps you going? And can you speak to this question? How can young people and students get involved in TFAM?
Well, let me begin with the question. Young people and students are already involved in TFAM. They are getting involved because of the programs that we have, where I come from, or where I have been being expelled from school, leaving this school to another because of sexual orientation. Is something that I don't want to see happen to anybody else. So we have provided a ground through our programs by teaching the young people to learn to love themselves, self-love, to come to appreciate and accept who God has created them to be. And so how they get involved is that we also give them opportunity to serve and minister. We give them the opportunity to exhibit their gifts, their God-given gifts in the choir, preaching the gospel and evangelizing, and also reaching out to the LGBTQ organizations to comfort their brothers and sisters. So we are open, and anybody that wants, to join the young people, we are open, and the opportunities for ministry are right there. What keeps me going is where I come from. I have been through a lot of fire, and I don't wish anybody else to go through what I went through. I have been through blackmail. I have been through prison. I've been in prison several times because when they realized they could not stop what we are trying to create, they ended up blackmailing me and creating people to speak or to come against me, and I ended up in prison several times. So this hell and high water that I've been through has really given me the tenacity to keep going. When I look back, I'm saying there could be another young man that is going to be destroyed by these homophobes. There are these young people that are going to be attacked and come against, and we do not want this. I don't want this to happen again. So that is why I keep going. And secondly, there are two things that keep me going: where I come from. Secondly, I'm a very staunch believer and a prayer warrior who believes that Jesus' gospel is a gospel of radical inclusivity. He was welcoming everybody where they were, not discriminating anybody. So I know with this that he overcame. Scripture says, he said, trouble you shall have, but be strong because I overcame. And I know we will overcome. So with that hope and faith, like Diane said, I am going, I am moving, and nothing can stop me, because with God, all things are possible. Thank you so much.
What an absolute blessing, Pastor Simon. And I think we have come full circle, as I started my comments by saying that before he was an activist, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King was a Christian, and it was his Christian faith that powered his activism. And whatever your faith, the specifics of that are not important, but it is the fact that you have a belief in a sense of hope and a belief in a sense of your own divinity, which can power your own strength to move through the critical days in which we live. Thank you so much to the LGBTQ Religious Archives. Thank you so much, Diane Bakuraira, Tom Twogyeirwe, Simon Anthony Mpinga. Let's go back now to Brother Adrian Van Clinken, and certainly to our host, Mark Bowman, for their thoughts. This has just been a fantastic conversation, and I have been blessed and humbled to be a part of it.
Yes, thank you so much, Joseph, Simon, Tom, and Diana. I can't begin to tell you what a momentous, groundbreaking, informative dialogue this has been. We are wrapping up here, but do want to offer Adrian an opportunity just to sort of give a couple of closing thoughts, and then we'll talk about what's coming up next for the LGBTQ RAN.
Yeah, just to echo my gratefulness, my thankfulness for the amazing work that you are doing on the ground. For me, it's been a pleasure, not just to be part of this conversation, but also to in recent years to have been watching, observing, and supporting you where I can in the journey, in the work that you are doing, and it's been an absolute privilege. To remind us of the title of this event, Changing the Story. Tom, Diane, and Pastor Simon, you and your partners in the struggle are the ones who are changing the story in Uganda. You are the ones who are changing the story in Africa, and you are change makers, you are trailblazers, and I just want to wish you blessings and strength and courage and determination in this work. Just as a closing comment, a couple of years ago, I had the absolute privilege of interviewing Bishop Christopher Sonjanjo, who, for those of you who don't know him, Bishop Sonjanjo is a bishop in the Anglican Church in Uganda, who shortly after his retirement 20 years ago came out and developed a ministry in support of LGBTQ people in Uganda, and who was then kicked out of his church and lost his retirement privileges as a result. And he has stayed to his faith, to his commitment, and to his radical belief in justice. And a couple of years ago, I had the privilege of interviewing him, and I asked him about what he sees as the future of Christianity and LGBT rights in Uganda and broader in Africa. And I just want to end with a quotation summarizing his response. So Bishop Sonjanjo said, "The future of Christianity and LGBT rights in Africa is not a one-day thriller. Just like the American civil rights struggle, the journey for sexual rights in Africa is one of faith, strong conviction, tears, and determination. It is for all, not just for an isolated LGBT community. It will need interdependence, advocacy, and family support. As the Bible says, know the truth, and the truth will set you free." And I think that's a very powerful statement to end with and to reflect on as we leave this seminar today and carry on with the work that we are doing in our respective places. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Adrian, and all of you stellar speakers for sharing today. And thank all of you who participated, watched, listened, shared your comments and questions as this conversation went on. Within a few days, you will all receive an email with a link to the recording today's program that you can share with friends and colleagues. And if you are interested in more opportunities to explore the history of queer religious movements, remember to check out the LGBTQ website and particularly our events page. There you will find announcements of future online programs, as well as recordings of past presentations. Our next webinar on Thursday evening, May 5th, will be a fascinating program entitled AIDS, Activism, and American Christianity with Anthony Petro, Ph.D., Reverend Dr. Yvette Flonder, Reverend Canon Ted Karpf, and Reverend Dr. Steve Peters. Mark your calendar for May 5th so you can enjoy that unique and provocative presentation. In closing, I remind you that LGBTQ is the first and foremost source of information on queer religious history. We are a very small operation that is funded through the generosity of friends like you. So if you share our commitment to ensure that future generations will hear voices and stories like we've heard today, please help make this happen with your gift. Finally, I remind you that if you would like to offer personal greetings or comments to any of the presenters, stay here and you will be invited into the Zoom room with them. Once again, thank you to our awesome presenters, and I wish every one of you who joined us here the very best in this day. Good day.